So what are your books, The Windshine Chronicles, about, and how'd you come up with this idea?
Okay, so well, like a lot of things, I guess it actually started back in high school because I didn't really play Dungeons and Dragons because I didn't really have anyone to play with, but I did used to read all the manuals, and they were
Okay.
actually from my older brother who was introduced to it from my cousin in Texas. But anyway, when he went to college, I had all his material, so it was like really a lot of stuff. And I was really into reading the Dungeons and Dragons books. But anyone who knows Dungeons and Dragons, particularly back in the '90s, know that the most of the stories took place in kind of like basically a European setting. And so it was my idea at that time, at like 16 years old, something like that, to write something that's Dungeons and Dragons like, but put it in like Africa or the Middle East or something like that because it just didn't exist when I was younger. It may exist now, I don't really know, but it didn't exist back then. And so I wrote a central character. She lived on a desert planet, and her name was Windshine. And basically, she was kind of similar to the Windshine of today. But frankly, I don't know. I've never been to a desert. I don't know anything. I know very little about the Middle East. I know honestly, I haven't really been to Africa, so I know very little about that. And so I wrote maybe 50 pages and then I just stopped because you can't really write what you don't know. Fast forward, I was living in Jeju, which is in South Korea, where I lived for 16 years. So
Oh,
fast
cool.
forward about I don't know, maybe 20 years later. And I wanted to write a fantasy story that took place in Korea on Jeju Island, but I couldn't really think of how I should do it. And I remember Windshine, and I was like, well, I always did like that character Windshine. I never did anything with her. I always thought it was a really good character. So how can I put her into Korea? And that's basically how the Windshine Chronicles began. For I know probably many people or hardly anyone who's listened to this have read it, but it is about these. And well, I changed her. So in the beginning, when I was 16, she was a human. Fast forward, she's actually a dark elf, and she's her and maybe 25 other dark elves have immigrated to Korea, and now they kind of there on the in the country doing various tasks. And that's how I kind of transported her to this fantasy, that kind of medieval fantasy setting of Korea. And really, the idea of the story is like she writes down the events that these young men who go on these quests do. And the idea of the
Mm.
story really is that the young men are trying to become heroes, and that's like the top of their society. It's a metaphor for people who have like a dream, because they're also young men. They actually are like teenagers who have a dream, and they're trying to accomplish this big dream. But it's like a really long journey to do these things, like to become a famous author, famous sports player, huge politician, wherever it is. Like one of the really top things is like a really long journey. And so the Windshine Chronicles is a metaphor for following your dreams and then all the difficulties that it takes in order to reach this goal.